They thought I was just the black sheep of the family, the dreamer who'd never amount to much. But tonight, everything changes. My name is Riley Monroe. I'm 29, and after 5 years of silence, I'm finally walking back into the lion's den, my family. They're gathering tonight at El Oria, the most exclusive restaurant in the city, to celebrate my sister Camilla's engagement. They have no idea how much my life has changed since I walked away. To them, I'm still the disappointment who chose a kitchen over a courtroom. My hands tremble slightly as I smooth out my simple black dress. I've faced Michelin-starred critics and fire-blazing grills, but somehow, the judgment of family still stings deeper than a bad review. Growing up in Westfield, Connecticut, meant one thing: perfection. My parents, Elaine and Victor Monroe, built their identities on status, country clubs, Ivy League ambitions, and the illusion of flawless children. Camilla was destined for Harvard Law. My younger brother Carter was a math prodigy bound for Wall Street. And then there was me, the middle child with a wild heart and a whisk in hand. They dismissed my love of food as a silly hobby. Cooking is for hired help, my father used to say. But what they never understood is that the kitchen wasn't just my dream, it was my sanctuary. Tonight, they'll dine at my table, under my roof, eating food I created with my own hands. And they won't even know it. As I stepped through the grand doors of El Oria, the familiar scent of citrus oil, rosemary, and caramelized shallots greeted me like an old friend. But this time, I wasn't arriving through the kitchen entrance in chef whites. I was walking in as a guest, about to dine with people who once made me feel small. The hostess greeted me warmly. "Good evening, Ms. Monroe. Your party is already seated." She glanced down at her list and added with a knowing smile, "Would you like to be shown to the Monroe table? Or would you prefer the chef's entrance tonight?" I gave a small shake of my head. "Let's keep the surprise a little longer." From across the room, I spotted them instantly. My mother Elaine, regal in her cream blazer, sipping white wine with the same measured judgment she applied to everyone around her. My father Victor, engrossed in the wine list, no doubt trying to impress Camilla's fiancé with his refined palate. Camilla, radiant in head-to-toe designer, laughed just a little too loud. And Carter, the golden boy, sat with his wife, exuding the quiet arrogance of someone who'd never failed. I drew a slow breath and approached the table. Elaine looked up, her eyes scanning me top to bottom in one practiced sweep. "Riley," she said with a tight smile, standing just enough for an air kiss. "You look, well, exactly on time," I replied, glancing at my watch. Camilla barely acknowledged me with a side kiss. "This is Nathan," she said coolly, motioning to her fiancé. He shook my hand, offering a firm grip and credentials in the same breath: Wharton MBA, junior partner, Goldman Sachs, the kind of man my parents considered a prize. I took my seat, heart steady now. They had no idea they were seated in the very restaurant I built from nothing. No idea that the amuse-bouche they'd soon taste was one I'd perfected over months of sleepless nights. No idea that the family failure sitting beside them had quietly become everything they claimed to admire, on her own terms. Just as I settled into my seat, our server arrived with the amuse-bouche, a delicate bite of compressed watermelon topped with fermented garlic and microgreens, my signature. He placed it before each guest with the same polished grace I had trained into every member of my team. Camilla raised an eyebrow. "Is this it? I hope there's more food than this." "It's a palate opener," I said evenly. "The meal hasn't started." She scoffed. "Please, Riley, I know what an amuse-bouche is. I just didn't expect to start with raw garlic." "It's fermented, actually, aged for 60 days, I replied, barely hiding my irritation. Elaine took the smallest possible bite, always watching her figure. Victor, on the other hand, popped the whole thing in without tasting. Carter whispered something to his wife, who gave a strained smile. The dynamic was achingly familiar. Me, the outsider, them, the evaluators. When the first course, heirloom tomatoes with house-made ricotta, arrived, Camilla pushed hers around the plate without interest. "A little acidic," she muttered. Victor sipped his wine. "Decent pairing, not exceptional." I swallowed the lump rising in my throat. These were dishes I'd agonized over, tested dozens of times, crafted with soul. To them, it was just another evening to critique. Then came the question. Camilla leaned in, voice syrupy sweet. So, Riley, how are you affording a dinner here? These prices, I mean, food service doesn't exactly scream six-figure salary. I looked around the table. All eyes on me, the same scrutiny I'd known since I was 13. I manage, I said simply. Seriously, she pressed. Are you dating someone rich? Or maxing out credit cards to impress us? My grip on the stem of my wine glass tightened. They still thought I was the failure. Still saw me as the girl who didn't belong. But the night was far from over, and so was their illusion. I took a slow breath, willing myself not to react the way I used to, shrinking into silence or laughing it off to keep the peace. Not tonight, not after everything I'd built. No, I said calmly, setting down my glass. I'm not dating anyone rich. And I don't use credit cards to impress anyone. Actually, I own this building. Camilla blinked. What building? This one, I said. The restaurant. The entire block. Actually, bought it last year through my LLC. The silence hit hard, like the hush after a dropped glass in a crowded room. Carter choked slightly on his wine. Elaine's eyes widened in disbelief. Victor frowned as if trying to remember something he'd read but never took seriously. Camilla let out a forced laugh. You mean you lease this space, right? No, I mean I bought the property. Every square foot of it. The building that houses this restaurant. The bakery next door, and the lofts upstairs. I reached into my leather folder, more out of habit than necessity, and laid down a copy of the deed and a list of tenants. R. Monroe Holdings, I added quietly. That's me. Elaine was the first to speak. Why didn't you ever tell us? I met her gaze. Because you never asked. You assumed I was struggling because I didn't play by your rules. No designer handbags. No flashy posts online. No grand declarations of status. You mistook my silence for shame. But I wasn't hiding. I was working. Victor's mouth opened slightly, then closed. The smugness on his face drained slowly, replaced by something that almost resembled regret. And Camilla? Her fork rested on the edge of her plate. Untouched, the sparkle in her eyes was gone. I didn't smile. Not yet. Let them sit with the truth a little longer. The silence was finally broken by Carter, who leaned back in his chair with an incredulous smirk. Wait, are you saying we've been paying you rent? I turned to him, unfazed. Yes, Carter, you, Aunt Elaine, Uncle Victor, your luxury apartments at Hillside Lofts? I own that entire complex too. Bought it from a struggling developer last winter. Elaine's hand flew to her chest. You're our landlord? Her voice quivered, not from fear, but from disbelief. Disbelief that I, the girl who once lived off thrift store finds, had somehow climbed to the top without their help. For over a year now, I confirmed. You've been contributing to my retirement fund every single month. Camilla finally found her voice again. This feels deceptive. Why wouldn't you tell us? I leaned forward, my voice quiet but firm. Because you never asked. And let's be honest, if I had told you, would you have believed me? Or would you have laughed? Like always? Uncle Victor cleared his throat, attempting to salvage some semblance of dignity. Riley, no one's denying that this is impressive. But owning property doesn't change the fact that you isolated yourself from the family. I nodded. Maybe I did, but I had to protect my peace. Every gathering, someone made a comment about my car, my clothes, my apartment. You mistook my restraint for failure. But I wasn't failing. I was building. Their silence now wasn't out of shock. It was out of reflection. They were finally seeing me not as the poor relative or the charity case, but as a woman who had forged her own path, quietly, on her own terms. For the first time, I felt no need to justify my life. They could either accept it, or be left behind. As the conference room buzzed with uneasy energy, I excused myself from the table and walked out to the garden terrace. The city skyline glittered beyond the glass rail, but all I could see was the whirl of emotions behind me. Moments later, I heard footsteps. It was Evelyn, my cousin's teenage daughter, the only one who hadn't said a word during the entire meeting. I just wanted to say, she began, her voice shy but steady. What you did in there, it was amazing. I turned, surprised. Evelyn looked at me not with pity, Not with admiration laced with envy like the others, but with genuine curiosity. "Thanks," I said. It wasn't about proving anything. I just needed them to know who I really was. She hesitated, then pulled a notebook from her bag. "I've been saving allowance money to invest. I don't know much, but I want to learn. No one in the family ever talks about money unless it's to show off." I smiled for the first time that day. "I'll help you," I said without hesitation. "But we're not going to start with real estate. We're going to start with mindset." Back inside, the family dynamic had shifted. Some avoided eye contact, others whispered, trying to recalibrate where I now fit into their hierarchy. But I wasn't playing their game anymore. When I returned to the table, I sat taller. I was no longer on the margins. I had redrawn the circle. And just as Uncle Victor tried to steer the conversation back to his latest acquisition, Blake, one of the few family members who never treated me differently, raised his glass. "To Riley," he said, voice clear and sincere, "the smartest investor in the family." It was quiet at first, then hesitant clinking. Even Camilla joined in, her smile tight but present. I met their eyes one by one. Let them celebrate me or not. I wasn't waiting for their permission anymore. The days after the family conference were quieter than I expected. No dramatic follow-up calls, no apologies, just a steady trickle of messages, some awkward, some strategic, and a few surprisingly sincere. I responded selectively. I ignored Aunt Clara's request for brunch, where she just wanted to understand how I managed it all. I didn't have the patience for performative curiosity. But I did meet with Evelyn again, over hot cocoa at a quiet cafe. I walked her through the basics of budgeting, compounding interest, and why her mindset mattered more than her current savings. Meanwhile, my property management team had taken over operations at Westfield Terrace. The leases were updated, the maintenance backlogs addressed, and I made one thing clear: everyone, family or not, would be treated equally. No special favors, no punishments. Camilla, my cousin who had once laughed the loudest at my lifestyle, sent me a long email. She claimed she always knew I had potential. I read it twice, then archived it without reply. If respect had to wait until I showed them a dollar amount, it wasn't worth reclaiming. But not everything was cold. Blake, my childhood confidant, reached out again. He invited me to lunch. Not at some overpriced downtown bistro, but at a cozy diner we used to visit as kids. "I've been thinking about starting something of my own," he said, toying with his coffee mug. "I'm done playing second fiddle to Uncle Victor." For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't alone at the table. We talked strategy, risk, and fear. Honestly, I offered to invest in his idea, not out of pity, but because I believed in him. And as we left the diner, he said something that stuck with me. "You didn't just buy a building, Riley. You rebuilt what this family forgot, dignity without a price tag." I smiled, realizing that maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something far more meaningful than revenge. 6 months later, the Monroe family gathered once more, this time not in some stuffy conference room or overpriced venue, but at my new property, a restored lakeside retreat just an hour outside the city. I'd bought the land quietly, rebuilt the old lodge, and opened it as a private culinary escape for special guests and events. But tonight, it was reserved for one thing only: us. When they arrived, no one asked about price tags or who the guests of honor were. The smell of rosemary and wood smoke drifted from the open kitchen, and long farmhouse tables were set not with crystal, but with hand-thrown pottery and wildflowers. Camilla arrived first, her usual designer wardrobe traded for a soft sweater and jeans. She didn't look me in the eye at first, but she handed me a mason jar of homemade preserves. "From Mom's old recipe," she said. I nodded, accepting it without words. Victor and Elaine were next. My father looked around the room in quiet awe, saying nothing, but I noticed his hand linger on the doorway like he was remembering something long buried. My mother actually hugged me. "It smells like home in here," she whispered. Later, I stood up to speak, not as the forgotten middle child, but as the woman I had become. "I invited you here not to remind you what I've built," I said, "but to invite you to be part of it, if you're willing. I don't need validation anymore. I just want real connection." No applause followed, just a long, still silence, and then something rare. A round of nods. Not approval, not pride, just respect. As dinner was served, braised short ribs, roasted heirloom carrots, and warm cornbread, I watched my family begin, slowly, to act like one. And in that moment, I realized, legacy isn't what we own, it's what we offer. After dinner, as the stars blanketed the sky and soft jazz drifted from the lodge speakers, I found myself standing at the dock, barefoot, holding a cup of tea. The stillness of the lake mirrored the peace I felt inside, something I hadn't known in years. Camilla joined me, quiet at first. I used to think you were running away from us, she said. Now I see you were just running towards something we couldn't understand. I didn't reply immediately. There was no need to defend the past anymore. You know, she added, when I walked into Maison that night, I didn't recognize the strength in you. I think part of me didn't want to. I turned to her, not angry, not triumphant, just honest. I didn't want revenge, Cam. I just wanted to be seen without having to scream. She nodded slowly. Well, you're seen now. And for the first time in years. It felt like we weren't two women caught in a silent competition, but sisters. Rebuilding something fragile and true. Later, as I watched the last guests say their goodbyes, I knew that whatever happened next, I no longer carried the weight of proving myself. That burden was gone, replaced not by applause or admiration, but by quiet respect and self-trust. My journey had never been about outshining anyone. It had been about stepping out of the shadows I was born into, and learning to cast my own light. Not because they let me, but because I stopped waiting for their permission. I didn't need a banner. I didn't need a plaque. That night, as I stood in the kitchen long after the last dish had been washed and the last guest had gone, I looked around the space I'd built with my own two hands. The copper pots gleamed under soft lighting, the worn wooden prep tables, the knife set I'd saved for over 2 years to buy, the shelves lined with cookbooks covered in flour stains. All of it told a story. My story, not one of overnight success or inherited wealth, but of quiet grit, of 4 a.m. mornings and 16-hour shifts, of being told, you can't, and whispering back, just watch me. And the best part? I didn't have to prove anything anymore. Not to my parents, not to Camilla, not even to myself. Because the real victory wasn't that I owned a restaurant. It was that I had rewritten my role in this family without bitterness. I didn't return to take revenge. I returned to reclaim my voice, on my terms. And in doing so, I discovered something far greater than validation. I found freedom. Life lesson? Sometimes the best way to respond to being underestimated is to build something so undeniable. It speaks for you. You don't need applause. You just need to keep going. Movie camera. If Riley's story moved you, if you've ever been doubted or dismissed, leave us a comment below and share your truth. Don't forget to hit that red heart like button and bell. Subscribe to Family Revenge for more powerful, emotional journeys like this one. Because sometimes, the quietest ones come back with the loudest strength.